Hey guys, Crib and Governor from the Gut Health Gurus podcast. I've got a background in food science and nutrition, and today I've got a guy that's going to turn the whole nutrition paradigm on its head. I first came across his work on Instagram, and these days I meet a lot of people on Instagram. It's an amazing platform, and he's been posting about some very interesting concepts, quite revolutionary. And today we have, I totally forgot your last name, Shah. It's definitely
Shah.
Shah. And what's your first name again?
Vas.
Vas Shah. So sorry. I just know you as a quantum nutritionist. I just look at you. He's just a quantum nutritionist, and it's kind of stuck in my head. It's like how people think of me as the gut health guru, and they have no idea what my
Right.
name is. And I had another guy on the podcast, the ancestral health guy, and I had no idea what his name was. I just knew him as the ancestral health guy. So my apologies, Vas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cribin. It's a pleasure to be here.
And what I like to do at the start of every show is to get it from the horse's mouth. And Ben Greenfield gave me a whole lot of flack because he thought I was calling him a horse. But if I can get it from the horse's mouth, who is Vas Shah?
So I am Vas Shah, and I am a quantum clinician. And so in my work, I help patients to optimize their health and wellness naturally by understanding their health challenges through the lens of quantum biology.
Sure.
And so being a quantum nutritionist is a small part of that package that I offer.
Awesome. I've actually never heard of someone calling themselves a quantum nutritionist. So just to give the audience a heads up, so I have no idea myself. So are you a medical doctor or you're in some sort of science field?
Yeah, that's right. So my background, my formal training is in podiatry. So I've been a registered podiatrist for about 11 years now.
Wow.
I've been working in London for most of that time. I run a private practice there on London's world famous Harley Street. And I also work as a quantum clinician. So that's my other side.
Well, I have to ask the question now. I've got a burning follow-up to that. What is a quantum clinician?
Okay, so it's really a very, very new field. And there are only literally a handful of quantum clinicians around the world. And so what it means to be a quantum clinician to the individual will vary slightly. But essentially, it's about health optimization from the viewpoint of quantum biology. Okay, so you've heard me say quantum biology a couple of times now. So you're probably wondering what on earth is that? So it's essentially studying at a different level of scale to the rest of the medical professions. They're based on the level of biochemistry, which is, say, here. And then you have the level of atoms, which make up all the biochemistry down here. And then you have subdivided the atom into subatomic particles. So you can see it as one way of looking at it would be 2 levels deeper than what we currently work from. So it's a much more in-depth approach. And it's an in-depth approach to understand not just the health aspect, but also how life works in general, how nature works in general. And when you look from that level of scale, a lot more understanding happens and you start to understand the condition a lot better. So for me, being a quantum clinician, I've composed a 7-pillar plan for health. And for me, it starts off with light, and then goes down to so light and energy come together as number 1 for me. Okay, and then I've got water and sleep and lifestyle and psycho-spiritual, and I forget what the other one is, movement, right?
Movement.
So all of these come together in a package, and the quantum nutrition element is just one part of that. And for me, food or nutrition comes down at number 4. Okay. And for a lot of people, when they're looking to get healthier, they go straight for the diet element. And hopefully what I'm going to share with you today is that you'll see that food is actually more about light. And so you really need to get to grips with understanding how light works in photosynthesis and also in our cellular biology, so that you can understand how all these systems work together. And they're all so tightly knit together that if you change something just a little bit, it can have some really big repercussions downstream. And that's one thing that most people won't be aware of at this point.
I'll just press pause for a sec. So I'm just really fascinated with your journey. So you started off in the medical field. You look really young. So I'm imagining, 10 years ago in your training and in your practice, at some point, something clicked, which opened up the door for this type of information, which is really revolutionary when you think about it. So if you could jump in a time machine, what was the moment when you came to the realization where perhaps the dietary paradigm or the health paradigm that you were from was perhaps not giving us the full picture?
Yes. So if we rewind a little bit, back in 2012, I started using and working with lasers and light therapy technologies in my clinical practice as a podiatrist. And it's not really a standard of care treatment in podiatry, although there are plenty of podiatrists that offer it in the UK. But it's very much an extended scope practice type of thing. It's very much a specialism. And I started using red and infrared light frequencies to heal my patients of various diseases. And to me, it was like black magic. It worked so well. And yes, I understood it on one level, the level of biochemistry. But to be honest with you, looking back, I didn't really understand it at that time. All I knew was it worked remarkably well. So from that point onwards, I had an understanding that light had some interesting effects. But the real biggie, what you'll probably want to know about, is about 2 or 3 years ago, I decided I would give the vegan diet a go, right? Yeah, it was all the rage, and there's everybody was doing it, so I thought I'll try it. And I've got friends who are still vegans. They call themselves junk food vegans. I was a really sensible vegan, I did it properly, whatever that is. And people, did you do it properly? Yes, I did do it properly. And I will explain. So every meal for every day, I put into Chronometer, which is a website where you can put in your foods and it will tell you your macros, and your calories and your vitamins and minerals. Everything was A-OK according to government guidelines. So I thought I was fine. At the same time, I had moved into a new apartment where there was LED lighting inside the apartment. At the same time, LED lighting had started to go up in the streets around where I lived. And I also knew that there was a Wi-Fi router directly under my bed in the floor below. Not a lot I could do about it at the time. I wasn't happy about it, but I just got on with it. And for someone who's always been very, very healthy and health conscious, doing all the right things, exercise, eating a balanced diet, sleep, and not drinking too much, all the rest of it, right? Despite all of that, I started to become very, very sick. I was anxious, I was depressed, my gut health was just non-existent. My sleep was probably the worst thing, chronic insomnia for about a year. So it's just a laundry list of health concerns, and it didn't make any sense. Why was I falling apart? And so I started doing some searching. And then I tried various different things. Some things helped a little bit, but didn't give me those day and night changes I wanted. And so eventually I came across the work of Dr. Jack Kruse, who's a neurosurgeon from the US. And initially I just thought, no, it can't be. Because, and for your listeners who are familiar with Jack's work, he's very controversial in some places. And, you know, I can see why, because a lot of the things that he says are so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
They're the exact reverse of what we've been taught on not one thing, but multiple levels. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. So I started trying out some of his protocols, you know, and the first thing I had to fix was my sleep, because I was up, you know, 9-10 times a night to pee. My sleep was disrupted anyway. And when you eat a vegan diet, you're generally eating a very high carbohydrate diet. And as you know, carbohydrates break down into sugars. And the body doesn't really like high blood sugars. It likes to keep them stable and relatively low, because they can cause a lot of damage to your blood vessels and other organs. And so you got to get up and you got to get rid of that sugar. So I started doing different protocols. One of them was to block blue light at night.
Mm-hmm.
And so these glasses that I'm wearing right now, these are blue blockers. And what they do is they block the blue and green frequencies of light. And so people that aren't familiar, blue and green, we see them as colors with our eyes. Those are our tools to the world. Those are our sensors. But scientifically, we can measure it in terms of the wavelength. And so blue light frequencies go roughly between 400 and 500 nanometers. And then the green starts at 500, goes to about 550. And so these are the specific frequencies that you want to block after the sun sets, because they disrupt a hormone called melatonin. It's known as the sleep hormone, but really it's the hormone of darkness, because it does so much more than just give you some sleep. And green light disrupts your melatonin about half of what blue light does. So blue light is the biggie. And I started doing this religiously. I started using blackout blinds in my bedroom. And lo and behold, my sleep improved pretty much from the first night.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that gave me a little bit of confidence in the man. And I started trying other things. And, you know, then I really went to town, because it's my body. I don't have to pass it through an ethics committee.
That's it.
I just got on with it. And I did some crazy things, you know, what people might think a bit crazy.
Like for what? Like for what? Like, just out of example, just out of interest.
Okay, so I'll tell you the craziest thing, because that's probably what your listeners want to hear. So I ate a 1/4 kilogram of raw beef liver, because I understood that that's the most nutritionally dense part of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
I did it in the summer while grounded, barefoot on the grass, and just wearing my Kinnicky swimwear. Okay. So for anybody that doesn't know, Kinnicky is a British brand of swimwear, and they have this special fabric that allows around 80% of the light frequencies to pass through, specifically the UV, because the UV is actually beneficial. So I didn't wear any sunglasses. I haven't worn them in years. And so my naked eyes had the sunlight coming in. My feet were grounded to the earth. It was a complete circuit. Yeah.
And I have to add, probably your genitals were getting a fair whack of nice UV light as well.
That's right. And, you know, for gents, if you want to raise your testosterone, one of the low-hanging fruit is to go for the UV light. And now, I'm sure you probably have a disclaimer somewhere and on your site, but I would just mention it anyway. Nothing I say here today is medical advice, so please consult your doctor, and this is just for informational purposes only. Again, This is what I tried. So, and yes, it definitely had an effect. And I felt amazing, by the way. Not that I'm suggesting people should eat raw liver, but I felt amazing afterwards. And other things that I started doing was cold thermogenesis. So cold thermogenesis is it's a practice of controlled cold exposure.
I'll just side note, just one sec before we jump onto the CT. I'll side note the beef liver because it's something that's really fascinating and interesting for me as well. It's something that I've added almost as a weekly ritual, and I'm not sure whether you've come across the work of Morley Robbins on the root cause protocol. I've had him on the podcast, but I'm not sure when this episode will drop. But he has an interesting theory about liver being very high in copper. And his
Yes.
I guess, hypothesis or his claim to fame is that he believes we are all iron toxic, and copper has the ability to actually bind iron. So aside from all the nutritional benefits of liver and the density and the sheer goodness of it, also there could be something happening in terms of its ability to bind iron and remove iron from the body. And this is something I've been pondering upon as well, because if you think about it, in the old days, like for guys especially, because we're always in some sort of battle, we're fighting, we're in a garden, we're toiling the soil. So there was always some element of bleeding. And so the girls are okay because they have their cycle. Whereas for guys, we're not bleeding as much anymore. So I thought it might be a good idea. So two things that I have added just for the audience information is beef liver and bee pollen. And both these things are very high in copper. And I think there's really nothing to lose. They're both very nutritious products. If they're having some sort of benefit in terms of removing iron from the body, I have seen some research with iron and its impact on mitochondria as well, which I'm sure we're going to get into, and the gut microbiome as well. So I thought, why not add it and see what happens? And then the research will work itself out eventually. So sorry for interrupting. So that's just my thoughts on the liver. So have you come across anything like that before?
That's a really interesting point. I don't know whether copper can displace iron out of the body. I haven't looked into that in detail. But there's a really good point about men bleeding and being in battles and working. And so I think a little bit of bloodletting now and again is probably beneficial because it will get your iron levels down. And there are some health benefits to that. So I just regularly give blood.
Yeah.
That's how I deal with it.
And that's something I'm really considering, because Morley also recommends that is actually to give blood. And it's a good thing for society as a whole, because they need, people need it, in hospitals and whatnot. But then there could be some benefits from it as well with this whole iron toxicity story.
Yeah. And everybody's a winner in this situation, right? When you're donating blood. The other thing about iron is we've all been eating grain products since the 1960s. I mean, this is especially true in the UK. I'm sure it's true in Australia too, where by law, all wheat products have to be fortified with some iron and some synthetic vitamins.
Thiamine or something like that, isn't it?
Thiamine, and I think also niacin, possibly, but some B vitamins. Now, there's some research coming through now that shows it could actually deplete your body's stores of B vitamins. So, it might not have been such a good idea. And also the source of the iron is questionable.
Sure.
So that could be leading to the iron overload issue, because in nature, when you have a mineral in a food source, it's attached to a protein. So it's locked in. And when you artificially add minerals in, this process doesn't happen. So it's uncoupled, you've unpaired this natural process, and it's sort of free iron. And I think that could be the problem. But also remember, with copper, yes, the liver's very high in it, but it's not as high in zinc. And copper and zinc have this teeter-totter seesaw balancing relationship. So if you're overloading with copper, you need to make sure that you're having a rich source of zinc. So
Yeah.
good old oysters for that.
Oysters. Gotta love them oysters.
Yes, raw
Thank
if you
Jack.
can take them. I'm not a big
Roy.
fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't
I
like
do
the
it weekly. You don't
Do
like
you
it?
really?
I love it.
Well, you guys have the beach and the weather, so yeah. Shucking them is a pain on the fingers, though.
I don't shuck my own. Admittedly, I just get the fishmonger to do it for us. But we get some sensational oysters down here, especially from Tasmania, which is an island just south of where I am in Melbourne, and also Coffin Bay in South Australia, which is just to the west of us. So we're so blessed in terms of the quality of oysters. And that's a weekly ritual for me, is to get a couple of dozen oysters for the family. So maybe with the liver and the oysters, we're doing okay.
I think you've got the right idea. It's about trying to emulate a ancestral eating pattern,
Yeah.
as best as you can in our insanely fast-paced modern digital world. And that's the process you have to go through in your mind when you're going food shopping and when you're preparing your meals, and also timing. Because remember, the timing of your meals is absolutely critical to your health, because they also form part of your circadian rhythms.
So true. So true.
Yeah. So circadian rhythms are things like the night and day cycles, the fact that you go to sleep at night and you awake in the day, how different hormones are excreted, and how different neurotransmitters are released at certain points in the day. Everything has its time, its timetable. And, you know, in our modern world, we can turn night into day, and that's creating problems for us.
Agree.
So I see you've got your blue blockers on as well as you're staring into your screen.
I sure do.
It's very important. So it's not just that the blue light affects your melatonin hormone. It's also that the blue light, when you're staring into any digital device, any screen, even while you're working in the day, is that it causes reactive oxygen species to form inside your cells. And these are like a free radical. Okay. And not all free radicals are bad, because they act as a chemical messenger in your cells. But when you have an overload of them, then you can start damaging the mitochondria. And the mitochondria gets damaged, then your energy output in the cell gets reduced, and then you're in big trouble, because then you start to get epigenetic changes, which are changes in your genome as a result of changes in your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with you. If I could summarize, so the timing of meals, absolutely critical. Then the whole impacts of blue light, all the way down to mitochondrial function. And while we're on the diet and also the mitochondrial function, how about, what's your thoughts on deuterium? Because so Jack speaks about deuterium quite frequently. What's your take on deuterium?
Yes.
Because it's a huge part of the diet, so in terms of exposure, but then also the water we consume, and also the body's natural ability to deplete deuterium. So what's your summary on the deuterium story?
So for anybody that doesn't know what deuterium is, it's basically the very obese cousin of hydrogen. And hydrogen, if you look on the periodic table, it's a very simple element. It's just a proton with an electron. And then what happens is deuterium is what's called an isotope. So it's exactly the same as hydrogen, except it has the addition of one neutron in the center of the nucleus. And this makes a massive difference, because it's twice as big and it's twice as heavy. And your mitochondria are they're often called cellular engines. Think about them as a power plant. They're much more complex than that, but we can come back to that later on. So your mitochondria basically takes in protons, and a hydrogen ion is a proton. So it's essentially fueled by hydrogen. Now, if you replace hydrogen with its obese cousin, it's so big and so heavy that it cannot fit in the seat that hydrogen would sit neatly in. And the seat is a very delicate spinning nanomotor. And so when deuterium plops himself down in that chair, he breaks it. And so you break these delicate nanomotors. And although you've got an awful lot of them in your cells, just a tiny increase in deuterium in your water, your air, or your food will actually have drastic changes into your cellular respiration.
And what are some
So,
downstream impacts of, because the whole concept of deuterium, when you try to speak about it, a lot of people are totally confused because it's a relatively new concept and idea. I mean, admittedly, guys like Gabor Chomley or Laszlo Boris have been talking about this for a long time. But in terms of the mainstream, I think people really struggle to get their head around it. But I think if we can speak to someone coming from the medical background like yourself, Vas, to talk about the downstream effects of deuterium, what is the recourse of having too much deuterium, and why is it an issue all of a sudden? I mean, surely this would have been a problem for a long time. Is it something that's new, or is it something that's just been there for a long time that's then accumulating to the point where we're at now in terms of the chronic disease epidemic that we're facing?
Excellent question. This is an excellent question, Kriben. So I'm really glad you asked. So I think it might help if I just rewind just a tiny bit, just to explain to people that might be new to what a mitochondria is. So it's a structure that's inside all of your cells, with the exception of red blood cells. They lose them. But every other cell in your body has got them, and they produce all of your cell's energy. And your cell needs an awful lot of energy to do all of its tasks, okay? So it needs to think of it in terms of currency, okay? And the currency of the energy of the cell is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And this molecule is constantly broken and then rejoined, and in the process, it releases energy, okay? And then we use this ATP form of currency to pay all the different people in the cells so they can do all the jobs, yeah? So we're paying our doctors and we're paying our bin men to take our trash out and all of that stuff, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The cell requires a certain level of energy to work effectively. When it does, we're healthy. When that energy output drops, think of it like a brownout, like a power station just fails and your power goes out. And so you can't pay everybody and the work stops. And that expresses itself as diseases. All the big ones: cancer, autoimmune, even diabetes type 2, neurodegenerative diseases. These are all mitochondrial diseases in origin. Now, the number of mitochondria your cells have depends on what kind of cell it is. So your heart and your brain and your gut, they're the most energy hungry. So they'll have 5,000-6,000 of these structures in each cell. Interestingly, an oocyte, which is a human egg, contains 100,000 mitochondria.
Wow.
Think about the intense amount of work it has to do in replicating very, very quickly from the moment of fertilization to growing that into a new human being. So you can see the comparison. And so to go back to your point about deuterium, we have been designed by nature to have a certain amount of deuterium in our environment. And of course, what is in our environment will also make its way into us. And this is a delicate balance, okay? And nature has perfected it. Unfortunately, since we started the chemical, industrial, agricultural revolution some 60, 70 years ago, these industries have been looking to make increases in profits and efficiencies And one of these efficiencies has been, to feed grains to livestock. And it makes life a lot easier for them, and it produces a lot more food, but it also introduces a lot more deuterium into our food supply. So we're a 2 million year old species, and we've only been tilling the soil for 10,000 years. So before 10,000 years, we didn't eat grains. Grains they come from a type of grass. We know cows eat grass, but the amount of grain that a cow would actually get into its stomach over the course of a day's grazing is very little. And now we've gone over to feeding cows predominantly grains. It creates problems for their health, and it certainly passes that problem on to us too. Because what deuterium does is, if you imagine it's the cousin of hydrogen, and hydrogen is in everywhere. It's in everything in your body.
Yeah, that's it.
Protein. Yeah, it's in the water in your cells, and we're 70% water. So you cannot get away from deuterium, and it will easily replace hydrogen. So on one hand, we've increased the amount of grains and deuterium in our diet because grains are very high in deuterium. And on the other hand, we've changed our lifestyle in such a way that we're not getting the restorative sleep that we need in order to help deplete the deuterium out of our bodies. Does that make sense?
Total sense.
And so there's actually lots of factors that allow our body to naturally deplete deuterium. One of those is exposure to natural full spectrum sunlight, and certain frequencies within the sunlight, specifically the red and infrared, help to drive it out. But most of us spend about 90% of our day indoors under artificial light. And that is, for most industrialized societies like here in the UK, and I'm sure in Australia too, everybody's got energy efficient lighting. And the problem with this lighting is that it has a very, very narrow band of frequency spectrum. Okay, so sunlight has got UV, and it's got the 7 colors everybody's familiar with. And then you've got the infrared as well. Okay, so this is quite a wide spectrum. But in artificial lighting or energy efficient lighting, you get a very narrow band. Okay, it's mostly just the blue. And that does not work with our biology. So what we've done is we've really innovated so much by trying to save energy, which is great, but we've ended up with a lighting environment that isn't suited to our biology. We've had 2 million years to get used to the sun, and we're very, very good at it. We've had like 50 or 60 years of artificial lighting. It's not long enough, and this is why we're sick. And this is the really surprising and astonishing thing about light. It has a huge impact on your health. And this is the bit that's a bit difficult for people to initially get to grips with.
Absolutely. I mean, if we could just summarize what we spoke about, absolutely agree with every single point that you've raised. A very ancient species of animal that we are, and all the innovations that have led to this point now are perhaps not serving us as well. And I've been in the food industry myself for 20 years, been to more than 100 food manufacturing sites. I've seen the degradation of our food supply. I've been to abattoirs. I've seen, cows and chickens and fish, anything you could think about being processed and killed and made into food, I've seen. And it's absolutely vastly different from how it would have been a million years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, say, 10,000 years is the dawn of the civilization that we know now. But all these innovations are serving us in one way, but they're harming us in the other. So it's like this double-edged sword. But what's really brilliant is that at least we're starting to have some understanding, and there's some awareness, and there's more and more people talking about these things on how they impact us. And then it allows guys like you and I to actually make a difference and change. Like my own struggles with depression and anxiety, and we're talking about deuterium potentially contributing to depression, and being bombarded with Wi-Fi radiation and sitting under an artificial blue light for most of the day. And then I wondered why I was 14 kilos heavier and perpetually depressed. But at least now, with the changes that we've implemented in our lives, wearing blue blocking glasses, having lower deuterium content foods or lower deuterium water, or using the sunlight to deplete deuterium, or using exercise and things like CT that you mentioned, now we can bring things back to how nature originally intended. And it always, to me, comes back to nature. I mean, as scientists and as a medical doctor, we're trying to work out the mechanisms and how these things work, and we're trying to develop clinical studies to prove it. But isn't it interesting that nature figured it all out, and we're just, with our tiny primitive brains, trying to understand and unlock it, and then trying to go into quantum biology and understanding how these tiny submolecular particles actually function and work, and how do they contribute to health. And this is the great work that you're doing. So how about our audience is really interested in gut health. I mean, we are the Gut Health Gurus podcast. After all, I'd love to hear your take on how quantum biology impacts the gut, because I'm a microbiome guy. So from the research that we're doing, we're starting to understand that the gut is a very important deuterium depletion organ, and certain species of bacteria in the gut have the ability to deplete. And so, and some of them, a lot of these organisms use deuterium because they need it. Any rapid growing cell, like a bacterial cell, needs a lot of deuterium. So they almost utilize it and remove it through our fecal matter for us. And yeast cells have ATPases, your little spinning nanometers that you spoke about, that spin in the opposite way, but they're doing the same thing. They're generating energy from that proton pump that you were talking about. So what's your take on how quantum biology relates to gut health?
Well, there's so much going on with gut health. And so as a quantum clinician, I look at the biochemistry level because that's still important and relevant. But then I look deeper at the quantum level too, to see what's going on. And so the way I see it is there's not one reason why so many people today have got gut complaints. There's multiple reasons why. And I think in a conventional medical approach, you may find one of the problems and block those off, but then what about all the others? And so one of them is glyphosate. So glyphosate is a huge problem. It's a pesticide, and it's the most widely used pesticide in history. Millions of tons have been sprayed all over the planet. And what it does is it decimates your gut bacteria. So those colonies of bacteria that would be helping to deplete the deuterium and doing all sorts of other essential functions for you, like, for example, making neurotransmitters.
Yeah. GABA and IPA and all that as well.
Yeah,
Dopamine.
and you will know about the gut-brain connection. Yeah. So these bacteria become decimated, and when you reduce the numbers, you reduce the output. So this is why you have the anxiety, depression connection with the gut. Then, of course, you've got deuterium, which we've talked about. And so one of the things that I do for my patients is, part of the package, I actually recommend sources where they can buy their meat, their food from farms that are trusted, that I've visited, and I actually have a close working relationship with.
Wow.
And so I actually go and visit them, and I go and see whether their claims are true. Are their chickens really free range? Do they really have this happy, happy-go-lucky atmosphere with perches and all the rest of it? And I'm happy to say they do. And the farm where I get my meat from is a raw dairy, and they also have beef and lamb and pigs. And they only feed their cows grass.
Mm-hmm.
Grass is incredibly low in deuterium, and that's the food that cows are supposed to eat. So the milk they produce is low in deuterium, and the meat is low in deuterium too. And then the pigs, they actually feed the milk to. So once they've extracted the fat to make butter and cream, they give the leftover milk to the pigs. So they're exclusively fed on this milk. And this is really important because I've not seen this happen before. So what this means is the information that is encoded within the atoms of the food, the grass, to the milk, to the pigs, is all the same information. And so they are quantized to their environment. And so what quantized basically means is that the information stored, the stimulus that you get from the sun has a very specific effect on the atoms. And I'm talking specifically about the electrons in the atoms. So if you imagine the nucleus of the atom, and then the electron is spinning around in the shell, a bit like how the Earth orbits around the sun, okay? And the way that it spins is a particular dance, okay? If you shine a, say, red light on it, it will make it do a particular type of dance. And then if you shine a blue light, it might start going crazy and spinning a different way. But if you shine equal amounts of blue and red light, you might find that the atom is balanced in a very calm and zen-like state. So I'm using these analogies to explain what's happening at the subatomic level. And when you have a quantized food, which means the information from the sun that has been encoded with the photons into the electrons of the food is the same as the sunlight that's hitting your eyes and your skin. So if you're not following, please just let me know, and I'm
100% with you, because I'm a firm believer of eating locally for that environment. And what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. To get your head around quantum biology is extremely difficult, and I'm one of those people that I'm trying to make sense of it as best as I can, but I'm by no means an expert. But my understanding is that the electrons are like a probability cloud. So it's only like this probability distribution, because no one can know where the actual electron is going to be situated until you get the observer effect, and then it's in a state of, a fixed position. But what you're saying is absolutely making sense to me. But for a listener that's trying to get this information but they're confused, the simple takeaway is that the sun is shining on a particular plant or an animal. It's imparting its energy, and what we're trying to do is trying to make everything consistent. So we're eating food from a certain environment, we're getting sun exposure from the same environment, so everything is quantized and in alignment with each other. Now, where things can get confused is because of globalization. Now we're importing a lot of fruit and vegetables and meat and seafoods from overseas. So, for instance, you could be in the middle of winter, but importing, what's a good example? Bananas. Jack's big on bananas.
It's a good point.
Importing bananas from the Philippines. And so those bananas are grown under a very different sun regime to your body which is sitting in the UK or London or sitting in Melbourne. So then the body is just confused.
That's right.
All these little things really make a huge difference. And I think scientists are only just beginning to unlock the impact of quantum biology. But I think it's going to take probably many years till this information starts to become more mainstream, and you get guys like yourself who are contrary nutritionists and who are actually using it in a clinical practice. So I'm so pleased that you're one of the really early people doing this kind of stuff. So hopefully I did justice in trying to explain it in a simple way.
That's brilliant. I mean, I like to give the example of spinach because people in the UK love to have it year round. And so in the winter months, like it's winter at the moment in the UK, and we get it from Spain or Italy. Now, Spain and Italy sit at a different latitude to the UK. So we are at 52 degrees north, and Spain, depending on where you're putting the point, will be something like 30 degrees. It's a huge difference. And so you can think about the sun's energy in terms of a light barcode. Okay, everybody's familiar with barcodes. And it shines this particular barcode all the time. And this barcode gets stored in the electron, which is spinning around the nucleus of the atom. And the atoms make up everything that you've got in your hand that you're about to eat. And so it's a form of information. And the information is the type of quantum, the type of electron spin going on, okay? And so do people love avocados in Australia as much as they do in the UK?
Absolutely. Avo and toast was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was invented in Australia. I'll claim it for the Aussies.
Okay, you've got that one then. Well, Instagram is full of these kind of posts, but avocados do not grow in the UK, and they come from the other side of the world. And when you eat an avocado, yeah, it's got good fats and minerals and all the rest of it, but you're really confusing your body. And the reason is it comes back to your mitochondria, because your mitochondria, they are like highly sensitive listening centers. Imagine them like the GCHQ, which is the British Intelligence Listening Center. And they hear all the whispers, right?
Yeah.
Or the NSA, whatever you're familiar with. And so they are constantly feeding in these electromagnetic frequencies. And for millions of years, they've only had the ones from the sun, which go from UV light to infrared light, okay? And they've had the Schumann resonance, which is a low frequency hum that comes from the earth. And so we're, as they say, yoked to these two sets of frequencies, okay? We've got the sun above, we've got the ground underneath, and we're connected like a circuit. When you detach this process, you get disease, okay? So when you're eating a avocado, living in London, you're telling your mitochondria what time it is and where you are geolocated. It's like a GPS system. And so the light coming in from your eyes is saying, hey, you're in London, UK. But your food is telling your mitochondria, actually, I think you were grown in Chile or wherever it came from. So this creates inflammation and chaos within the mitochondria. So if you're healthy, yeah, you can carry on doing that for a while. I wouldn't recommend it. But if you have a chronic disease like autoimmunity or cancer, that's definitely a bad idea because you're already dysregulated. So your mitochondria listens to all the light frequencies and it helps it to tell the time. And when your cells can't tell time properly, that's when you get a serious mitochondrial disease. And cancer is now 1 in 2.
Yeah.
Those are the latest figures for the UK.
I think it's the same here in Australia. Literally 50%. It's an absolute staggering statistic when you think about it, that sitting here, hopefully I'm hoping we're kind of bucking the trend and we're outliers because we're trying to do the right thing in terms of improving our mitochondrial health. But really, out of two people, one of them will end up with some form of cancer. So it's an absolute tragedy that our modern society is
Right.
facing.
I mean, there's something seriously wrong with the way that we are living today, because no other species has to face the reality of a 50% risk of cancer. And that's just cancer. Then we've got autoimmunity and type 2 diabetes and mental health issues and all the rest of it. And to go back to your point earlier when you talked about mental health, if you haven't got enough output from your ATPase nanomotors in your neurons, in your brain, how are you expected to focus?
Yeah.
I mean, how many people have brain fog today and forgetfulness? Yeah. And that's not just the deuterium that's building up in the mitochondria. That's also because of the electromagnetic frequencies from wireless technology. So your Wi-Fi, your 4 and 5G, this is really a bad idea for our health. I know it's convenient to get Netflix downloaded in 5 seconds.
That's it.
But, on your phone, but it's going to have some huge implications to our health going forwards.
Undoubtedly.
And I don't know whether you want to talk about 5G just quickly, because that is worth mentioning, because it's a completely new, different technology.
Sure.
And so, okay. So when we went from 1G to 4G wireless technology, all four of them work in essentially the same way. You have a telephone mast, and then you've got a transmitter on it, and it broadcasts the frequency in waves, like you drop a pebble into a pond and it ripples out. Yeah. 5G is completely different. It's because 5G is a laser pointing directly at you.
Wow.
Okay. So I've got my laser pointer here, and I'm not going to point it at you, but if you look behind me, I don't know whether you can see, but you can see the green line. Okay.
I can. Yeah.
That is what 5G is, because what I've just shown you, a laser is essentially a photon gun. So you're firing out photons in a very narrow beam, and they go a very long distance. 5G is the same. Okay, it's exactly the same, except it's using microwave radiation. So microwave radiation, the same technology you have in your microwave oven. It's around 2.4 gigahertz. And that's exactly the same as Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
That's also 2.4 gigahertz roundabouts. The only difference is power. So your Wi-Fi takes a little, 12 or 15 volt charger to power it. Your microwave oven takes, 250 or 40 volts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same thing. And your brain is getting microwaved constantly. So as if that wasn't bad enough, Kribben, there's more. So with 5G, the frequency bands that are going to be used are going to be much, much, much higher. So people's Wi-Fi in their home, that's 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Those are the standards. Now, initially, the 5G wireless technologies are going to start off at the sub 6 gigahertz range. So it'll be very similar in terms of your Wi-Fi on the spectrum perspective. But then eventually they'll start getting higher and higher. And I'm reading reports about the US, who initially rolled it out, that they've got much, much higher frequency bands right from the get-go. So they can go up to 120 gigahertz.
Wow.
So this feels like a jackhammer to your mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
And because the mitochondria work very delicately balanced with the electric flow, as the electrons flow into the membrane, everyone knows what electricity is. That's the flow of electrons, okay? So wherever you have a flow of electrons in a line, you automatically have a magnetic field at right angles to it. They're just married like that. That's how nature works. Okay, it is what it is. So electric flow, magnetic field, electromagnetic fields, EMFs. That's what they are. And so when our cells do their job, the mitochondria are tunneling the electrons and protons, and they're making ATP. They create their own little electromagnetic fields, and they're very subtle. And that's how they work. When you're exposed and bombarded from outside constantly with microwave radiation, electromagnetic radiation, it disrupts the flow and the inner workings. And this causes a drop in your energy output. And as I said earlier, when you get a drop in output, you get a drop in voltage, you get a drop in energy. And that's expressing itself on the physical level as a disease. Yeah, all the big ones that we have today. And
Totally.
so there are things you can do to protect yourself, but I mean, you're not going to be able to protect yourself and escape it completely, but there are, layers of things you can do that can make considerable reductions to your exposure. And that's what it's all about.
That's amazing, Vas. I think you summarized it so well. I mean, food was part of the story, but then you brought up some other very important points about EMFs and certainly the whole impacts on mitochondria. And I just wanted to side note and highlight to people that mitochondria are in every cell, and you mentioned aside from blood cells. So you've got to think you've
just
got
the
these
red blood cells.
Sorry, I said from red blood cells.
Just red blood cells. All the other blood cells, the white ones, they have them also.
Oh, okay. Just the red blood cells.
You can affect your immunity.
Ah, with the white blood cells. Gotcha. So the red blood cells don't have them, but certainly all the other organs have mitochondria if they're not producing enough energy because they're being disrupted by things like EMFs or deuterium. Then we could potentially end up with dysfunction in that particular organ site. If it's the brain, then it's a neurodegenerative function. If it's the heart, something like heart disease. If it's in the gut, leaky gut, gastrointestinal dysfunction, IBS. Other cells, it could be lungs might end up with lung cancer or skin cancer or some form of cancer in an organ. So this is really important information for people to take heed of because it's really cutting edge, but it's solidly based in science. And the modern world is really setting us up for failure in terms of disease. But hopefully with this information, we are empowered to actually make changes. So Vas, we're pretty much up to time. So we'll start to wrap because I know I want you to get on with your day. It's early for you, so you've got your whole day lined up. So firstly, I just wanted to finish on a couple of things before we start to wrap up. You mentioned CT. We didn't go deep down that rabbit hole. So how about you quickly break down CT and what are some benefits for mitochondrial function or health in general?
Okay. So first off, I have to say that CT works best for people who have a uncoupled haplotype.
So cold thermogenesis, just in case people are not aware of what we're talking about.
Yes. Cold thermogenesis is a controlled cold exposure practice. And it works best in people with Northern European ancestry, which actually covers most of the globe, even people in Asia as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had my ancestry DNA test done, and I was very surprised to find that I had Northern Siberian haplotype. So this is going back about 10, 20,000 years to my mitochondrial Eve, or my ancient mother.
Yeah.
And because you only get your mitochondria from your mother. So for most people, it's a case of slowly exposing yourself to cold, because that's what we would have done as we emerged from Africa and started making our way into the northern climates in Europe and cooler climates, more importantly. And so we would have been exposed to cold all the time, and it would have been seasonal, obviously. So when it's December in the UK and it's obviously very cold outside, it's a benefit to your health to expose yourself to that cold temperature, because that is a circadian rhythm setting process that tells your cells, hey, you're in the UK, that comes from the sunlight, and it's this time of year, it's cold. And think about what happens when you put a bottle of water in the freezer. What happens to it when it freezes?
It expands.
Exactly. And it's the opposite of what happens with most other substances. So water's unique in this way. And as it expands, it stretches out the bottle. Now imagine your mitochondria is the bottle. And your mitochondria's got a double membrane, okay? Like a double pillowcase, if you like. And the layers between the pillowcase need to come closer in contact, okay? So if these are the two layers, you want them to come closer together. And every single nanometer they come closer together, you get an exponential increase in efficiency, okay? Because there's less distance for those subatomic particles to travel, okay? And so when you're cold, it expands, you get more energy, and your mitochondria function better. And they start to improve. And when you combine it with fasting, a fasting protocol, and a ketogenic diet, which is what is advisable in this latitude, you start to see multiple benefits, and you start to get, you're layering the process, and amazing things start to happen with your health. And like I said to you earlier, everything in my protocol has been tried on myself first.
Mm-hmm.
And for somebody who's always been relatively slim, but never quite had my abs visible, now they are visible. Wow. And it's been this slow process where I've started to add another protocol and another protocol. So I now do my sauna therapy. And then after that, I'll jump into a cold shower for 2 minutes. And then I'll go back in the sauna. So what I'm doing is I'm constantly shrinking and expanding this exclusion zone water, a special type of water, like a jelly water that's inside the mitochondrial membrane. And as it does that, it helps to flush out some of the toxins that are in there too.
Wow, it sounds like we're doing a lot of the similar things, but I guess we're in the same sort of paradigm. So it's not surprising at all. And Vas, I'm a lot older than you. I'm almost 42, but I can say that I feel amazing. I feel a lot healthier and vibrant, especially I go to the gym in terms of my strength and my abilities in the gym and just recovery times and whatnot. Just following all the things that you're talking about, a ketogenic diet, regularly doing CT. I do CT in the ocean. So I have a gym that's actually based on the beach. So this is so funny. Back in the old days, you'd go to the gym and there's bright, bloody LED lights shining over your head. And now you think how silly it is. But now I actually train outdoors in the sun and have a killer workout and really heavy deadlifts, just short and sharp. And then I'm just literally running into the ocean, even in the middle of winter when it's like in Australia, it'd probably be like 8 degrees in the ocean, and just jumping in and then straight into the sauna and then just cycling to and fro. And you just feel amazing. And I'm sure you get that.
You're very, very lucky.
Yeah. Super
That's
lucky.
what I have to say. You're very, very lucky, because with your skin color and your ancestry, you're in a much more similar environment to where your ancestors would have been tied to with their latitude and their sunlight exposure. So this summer just gone, I got myself a little bench for the garden with some weights, and I started doing some exercises under full spectrum sunlight.
Yeah.
And I noticed improvement in my strength, in my recovery.
Yep.
But then I had to go back to the gym because our summers are over like that. Blink and you will miss them.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's I guess that's the UK, right? And Melbourne. Don't get me wrong. Melbourne's schizophrenic as well. 4 seasons in one day. I mean, we could have a winter blizzard in the middle of summer where it drops to like really cold, like sub 15, and then all of a sudden the next day it's 45. So you get these massive swings. But just to give you a heads up, you might be interested. I got my genes tested as well. So on my
Right.
mother's, because as you mentioned, it's all the mitochondrial DNA. So my mother's DNA is HV2. So it originates from most likely somewhere in Persia, I would say, somewhere in the Middle East type region. So you're right. Yeah, I'm probably quite lucky that my latitude is quite similar to where my ancestors came from. So it's quite fortunate in that sense. So Vas, I
So,
must, yeah. Sorry, yep.
sorry, I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to ask, do you know what latitude Melbourne is?
Melbourne would be, I would say, in the 30s.
Okay,
In
yeah.
the 30s,
So that's roughly the same as Iran today.
yeah, but it's
Yeah,
just the
that makes
opposite
sense.
side of the equator. So yeah, pretty fortunate. But anything else you wanted to highlight that people might not be aware in the whole quantum nutrition, quantum biology space before we finish up?
Yeah, so there's so much more, but we've run out of time.
How
What
about
I would
you
say,
recap your step? You have this different steps. Just recap really quickly, just for the audience, in terms of the practice with your patients.
sure. So, number one, light and energy, because energy is light. And when I speak about energy, I'm talking about electromagnetic fields. And if anybody's interested who's listening, just Google EMF spectrum and you'll see what the spectrum is. At one end, you've got cosmic rays from outer space, and the other end, you've got radio waves. Yeah, we use them for radio communication. And all of them are actually photons. The entire thing is photons. That's what carries the wave. But we only see this narrow band called visible light. And this is why I put light and energy together. And for me, and the way that I work, that's number one. So you have to get that right. Two, I've got water, because water is a battery and you don't want to be drinking any water with fluoride in it. So yeah, this is another protocol that I go through with my patients. So three is sleep. Sleep's so important. It's so underrated. Nutrition, number four. Yeah, we've done that one.
Mm-hmm.
Number five is structure. Okay, so your biomechanics. So I work with my patients to, as you know, my background is in podiatry, so I work with them to get their posture as upright, as aligned as possible, because your nerve transmissions work with photons. And so if you are not aligned properly, it's like a bottleneck of energy up and down the body. So number six is lifestyle. So these are all factors like your social circles, your work-life balance, movement and exercise, whether you smoke or you drink, all these things. And you have to be so careful about who your social circles are, because they have such a huge impact on you and your mental health. And number seven, psycho-spiritual. I refer on for this, and I have some really amazing, talented people and therapists that I work with, and I let them get on with this. But it's number seven, but it's still important, and I still put that into the protocol to make sure we cover everything.
Right. What a fantastic list. And it's so holistic, and it's a testament to what we've been talking about this multifaceted faceted impact on the body and bombardment that we're facing as a modern society. And I think it merits having multiple strategies that we're talking about to address the dysfunction. So that's really amazing. And what I like to do at the end of all my shows, Vas, if there was one thing that someone could do to improve their gut health or health, where would they start?
That's really quite easy, and it all comes back to sunlight. Just get out more. Make sure you do it safely. Make sure that you work with a quantum clinician so you can be educating how to do that. But get more sunlight. Yeah, it all comes
Great,
back to the sun.
great. Nature all comes back to nature, and the sun is just this powerful energy source. And I'm not surprised that our ancient cultures worship the sun because it's so important for life.
And it's free.
And it's
That's the
free.
thing. Once you're taught how to use it safely, that's it. You don't have to keep going back. It's free and it's
Absolutely.
for everybody.
Absolutely. For all of us. Vas, huge gratitude for coming onto the show. Now, if someone is fascinated by what you're talking about and they're resonating with you, you've got such a beautiful voice and a beautiful tone. So I'm sure people would be finding it very pleasant to listen to. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, to work with you, to engage in your practice, they need help from your quantum nutrition and quantum therapy practices, how can they find you?
So they can get in touch with me on my website. It's thequantumnutritionist.co.uk. I do have an Instagram account with the same handle as well. And my podiatry work is shahclinic.com.
Awesome. Vas, thank you so much. What an
It's
honor
been a
to speak
pleasure,
to you.
Kriven. Thank you for having me on the show.
My
All right,
absolute
speak to
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.